Last year I covered the brief but not memorable, well, maybe it was memorable, but not for the reasons they were probably hoping for, tenure of David Putnam as the head of Columbia Pictures. Basically, yeah, his idea of more smaller movies, and basically telling off most of the big Hollywood blockbuster productions, specifically Ghostbusters 2, didn't really pan out for him, and he was gone within about 2 years of his hiring as the head of Columbia Pictures. And he's not the first person to be at the forefront of a major studio and have completely times when he runs the company and he runs it straight down the toilet and it feels like there's no hope for return. Of course, right now we're dealing with that with David Zaslav, but there was one time back in the 2000s when United Artists was kind of in a struggling place in time. Like, they couldn't really figure out which direction they needed to go. But this is something they've been dealing with for a long period of time. For those of you who don't know what United Artists is, it was founded originally in February of 1919 by Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, Mary Pickford, and Douglas Fairbanks, as a venture premised on allowing actors to control their own financial and artistic interests rather than being dependent upon commercial studios. After numerous ownership and structural changes and revamps, United Artists was acquired by media conglomerate MGM in 1981, shortly after the disappointment of Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate for a reported $350 million, which by today's numbers would have been $1.2 billion. And they were a company that kept afloat overall during the course of the next 25 years, essentially. I mean, they never really could get back to where the studio was before, mostly being a part of the MGM family for that good chunk of time. And they're still part of that family even to this very day. But there's one point in time, though, where United Artists was really struggling to figure out which direction they needed to go. Going back to, by the 1990s, they were really MGM was really trying to figure out how to keep the studio in check overall. Francis Ford Coppola even tried to buy United Artists in 1999, who essentially rejected the offer, and eventually Coppola ended up signing a production deal with the studio in general. But by that point, it was repositioned as a specialty studio. MGM had just acquired the Samuel Goldwyn Company, which had been a leading distributor of art house films, and after that name was retired, MGM folded UA into MGM Pictures, G2 Films, and the renamed Goldwyn Company, as well as MGM's specialty London operations, which was later renamed United Artists International. Distribution, branding, and copyrights for two of UA's main franchises, the Pink Panther and the Rocky series, were moved to MGM, although select MGM movies, notably the James Bond franchise co-held by Dan Jack LLC and the Amityville Horror remake, carried a United Artists copyright. The first art house film to bear the UA name was Things You Could Just Tell Just by Looking at It, which was released in 2000. And then they spent much of the 2000s figuring out where they really wanted to go with it. They hired several different people over the course of the next couple of years that didn't really last very long in general, even though they did hire somebody in September 2001, Bingman Ray, which led to a couple of notable movies, Bowling for Columbine, Nicholas Nickleby, the year's Oscar winner for Best Foreign Language Film, No Man's Land, Undertow, and Hotel Rwanda, and then Ray stepped down from the company in 2004. In 2005, Sony picked up United Artists as well as Paramount for $4.8 billion, and though they were only a minor investor, Sony closed MGM's distribution service and folded many of the staff into its own studio. The movies UA had completed and planned for release at that time, Capote, Art School Confidential, The Woods, Romance and Cigarettes, were assigned to Sony Pictures Classics, and in March of 2006, MGM would eventually return again as a domestic distribution company after the Weinstein Company picked them up. Sony had a minor stake in MGM, but otherwise MGM and UA operated under the direction of Stephen Cooper, the CEO and minority owner of MGM. Now this takes us to what I want to cover here today, and that is something that happened that November involving one of the biggest stars at the time, who was definitely causing more news, not for his movies, but for some of the crazy stuff he had been doing outside of his movies, Tom Cruise.
I need you to trust me. One last time.
In the mid-2000s, Tom Cruise was still considered to be a dominant draw at the box office, with films such as The Last Samurai, Minority Report, and also War of the Worlds, even though by that time he was becoming more known for his more controversial situations he found himself in. His advocacy for Scientology, including the lawsuit he eventually he tried to sue the creators of South Park for the infamous Trapped in the Closet episode, but also he was also in the controversy with Project Technology, and also his brief, albeit brief, marriage to Katie Holmes, which didn't last very long in general, and it became more of a distraction compared to some of the other things that he was doing at the time. Of course, he went on Oprah, jumped on the couch, talking about how much he loved Katie Holmes when, yeah, it was definitely a weird thing going on with him around that time. But nevertheless, Tom Cruise was still a reliable draw. He had been with this contract through Paramount Pictures that he first signed back in 1993 with his talent agent Paula Wagner to form Cruise Wagner Productions. The company has since produced several of Cruise's films, the first one being Mission Impossible in 1996, which was also Cruise's first project as a producer. In addition, he would produce films that he was not involved in, stuff like The Others, Shattered Glass, Elizabethtown, Narc, Acid Dusk, and Without Limits. Cruise is noted as having negotiated some of the more lucrative film deals in Hollywood, and was described in 2005 by Hollywood economist Edward J. Epstein as one of the most powerful and richest forces in Hollywood. Epstein argues that Cruise is one of the few producers, the other being George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Jerry Bruckheimer, who are regarded as able to guarantee the success of a billion-dollar film franchise. Epstein also contends that the public obsession with Cruise's tabloid controversies obscures full appreciation of Cruise's exceptional commercial prowesses. On August 26, 2006, Paramount Pictures announced that it was ending its 14-year relationship with Tom Cruise. In the Wall Street Journal, chairman of Viacom at the time, Sumner Redstone, cited the economic damage to Cruise's value as an actor and producer from his controversial public behavior and views. Cruise Wagner Productions responded that Paramount's announcement was a face-saving move after the production company had successfully sought alternative financing from private equity firms. Industry analysts such as Jay Epstein commented that the real reason for the split was more likely Paramount's discontent over Cruise Wagner's exceptional large share of DVD sales from the Mission Impossible franchises. Although Tom Cruise would not be out of work with the studio for too much longer, as not but a few months later, MGM and United Artists came calling, and on November 3rd, 2006, and on November 2nd, 2006, not November 3rd, Tom Cruise and MGM formed a new version of the United Artists. Film star Tom Cruise has teamed up with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Inc. to resurrect United Artists, the movie studio founded 87 years ago by studio legends Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and others, MGM said on Thursday. The partnership under which Cruise would star and produce films for United Artists with his production partner Paula Wagner comes about 2 months after the bitter end of Cruise's 14-year production deal with Paramount Pictures. Wagner will serve as chief executive for United Artists. Cruise and Wagner will exercise control over United Artists' production slate, from development to the ability to commit financial resources to new pictures, MGM said in a statement announcing the deal. The new UA will be located in Los Angeles. Cruise, whose latest film, Paramount's Mission Impossible 3, grossed more than $390 million worldwide, will still be available to appear in movies for other studios under the new deal. The reconstituted UA will start off with a production slate of about 4 films a year, MGM said. The talent-friendly studio will be reborn as a place where producers, writers, and directors and actors can thrive in a creative environment, MGM said in a statement. Yes, 4 films a year. You want to know how many movies that came out that Tom Cruise was involved in? 2. Only 2. Those 2 movies being Lions for Lambs and then in 2007, and then Valkyrie in 2008. Lions for Lambs was the first of the 2 movies, and that was supposed to be the big movie that was supposed to show what this new studio was going to be like. And, there was a lot of high expectations for this movie. It had Robert Redford as the director. The writer was Matthew Michael Carnahan, who had written The Kingdom and also wrote State of Play. He was a fast-growing writer. Redford was going to be in the movie with Meryl Streep. There was a young cast of good talent, including Michael Pena, Andrew Garfield, Peter Berg, Derek Luke. The MGM was putting this out in November. They were setting this up to be the big movie that was supposed to show what they could do, and also, not only that, to become a studio to fight with you for Oscar consideration too with this movie. And the end result, was a film that did not do as well as they wanted to. The film got thrashed by critics, 28% on Rotten Tomatoes, a Metacritic of 47% out of 100, and CinemaScore gave the film a grade C on a scale of A to F. The box office also didn't help either, as the film only brought in $6.7 million on its opening weekend and ended up growing $63 million worldwide, though domestically it was much lower than that. But nevertheless, it did make its money back overall, so it wasn't really a complete loss overall for the studio. But the biggest problem with the movie in general, since I've watched this movie, is simply the fact that it was just way too preachy, and we were getting so many of these movies around this time that were like anti-war, like talking about they were mostly anti-Iraq war films, like, you know, Redemption. We had Stop Loss proved to be a much better film than the ones that I talked about. We also had A Mighty Heart. We had all these different movies that were coming out about how fighting in the war against Afghanistan, you know, they were seen as kind of anti-war, and, you know, the whole idea of this movie in particular was, you know, it was essentially just way too preachy for its own good. We spent a lot of time just hearing people just talking and talking and talking, and not really a whole lot of action going on in this movie. And that's why the film kind of fell apart, and kind of the film overall wasn't a big hit with critics overall. Like I said, it did decent numbers at the box office, but for a Tom Cruise movie, they expected a lot more than just a measly $6.7 million opening and a $63 million worldwide total. It really did damper Tom Cruise's legacy overall, because Tom Cruise was still, like I said, a reliable draw at the box office, but then he does a movie like this, and it just completely crashes out, and it all, I said, right from the get-go, you could just tell that this new company that was being formed with Paula Wagner and Tom Cruise was simply just not going to cut it. So much so that not even a year into the first official movie getting released, Paula Wagner was already gone. Like, Paula Wagner left United Artists to produce films independently, and basically it was already shutting down what was supposed to be this new groundbreaking move over at United Artists that only led to 2 movies coming out during that tenure. And the other one being Valkyrie, which is actually the far superior movie, directed by Bryan Singer and featuring Tom Cruise in a very good role overall. It was a movie where, you know, the film depicted World War II, Nazi Germany, and depicted the July 20th, 1944 plot in Germany by German army officers to assassinate Adolf Hitler, and to use the Operation Valkyrie National Emergency Plan to take control of the country. And because he put himself around these seasoned actors, Kenneth Branagh, Bill Nighy, Eddie Izzard, Terrence Stamp, and Tom Wilkinson, and not only that, the movie did much better than Lions for Lambs did. And it was mostly because United Artists basically changed around what they were going to do. They didn't put the focus on Tom Cruise in this movie, and mostly focused on the director, Bryan Singer, who had done The Usual Suspects, X-Men, and Superman Returns before this. And in a way, it actually helped paid off in a big way, because the film not only was a much bigger hit critically, but it went on to become a massive hit. It made $200 million worldwide, and over a $75 to $90 million budget. It made much more money than anybody could have imagined. And, you know, unfortunately, that was it for for Tom Cruise United Artists tenure. Unfortunately, it was just those 2 films. Their grand plan to do 4 films every year didn't even make it halfway through. I mean, that's really depressing, and that's really unfortunate. And you got to wonder what really went wrong here, because between when Lions for Lambs and Valkyrie came out, only one other movie came out by United Artists. That was Quantum of Solace, and that really wasn't their movie. It was mostly the co-production of MGM and Columbia Pictures, who of course, were at the time were both the owners of the James Bond franchise at that point. And yeah, United Artists was kind of on its last legs at this point, because after Valkyrie came out, they only made 5 other movies before they eventually shut down for the first time around with the remake of Fame. There was also Hot Tub Time Machine, which ended up being the last original film date to be released under the United Artists banner. And then there was Skyfall, which United Artists is only the copyright holder over. The remake of Red Dawn, again, copyright holder, and Hot Tub Time Machine 2, the copyright holder on that one. As far as Tom Cruise goes, it took a little bit, but Tom Cruise did eventually find his way back to where it all began. After Valkyrie came out, he starred in a couple of other movies that weren't really big successes, most notably Night and Day. But then Tom Cruise went back to what made him popular in the first place, going back to the Mission Impossible franchise, the first movie that he ever did as a producer, and it was actually done without Paula Wagner, who had gone on to become an independent producer. And so Tom Cruise was basically going off on his own at this point. And lo and behold, Ghost Protocol ended up being a big critical and commercial success, and eventually opened the door for Tom Cruise's comeback in the 2010s with the success of the Jack Reacher movies, Oblivion, Edge of Tomorrow. You know, he became that face that whenever you see him in a new movie again, you got excited for it. I mean, the guy really went from being somebody whose career was pretty much on fumes to somebody that anytime he has a new movie coming out, we get excited and we're ready to see what he does next. I mean, one of the big examples of that was Top Gun Maverick, a sequel that, let's be honest, after nearly 40 years, nobody really was one to see a new Top Gun movie. I mean, what could they really do? Lo and behold, Top Gun Maverick comes out, and it not only becomes a massive hit, but it becomes one of the biggest hits of the decade, the biggest hit of the decade so far. It makes over $1 billion, and it really helps to revitalize Tom Cruise's career as a whole. And you know, nowadays he's a box office draw, and anytime you see him, you know, promoting all those stunts and all that, you could just tell that he felt more comfortable essentially doing these movies again. And it just, maybe that's what it was back then. Maybe it felt like he was really struggling to keep up the pace with what was being seen with the national spotlight on him overall. Like, it was really, I think really the whole thing was the fact that he was doing this when he was married to Katie Holmes, and nobody was really buying into the real belief that he really loved Katie Holmes that much. I mean, he probably did, but at the same time, it's just like, it just felt really off at that point, and it just really felt like it was showing up on screen with some of those movies in particular, which really, if we're being honest, Lions for Lance was really the only major misfire in that little block there, because from the time he bought United Artists to the time he wasn't working there. Because shortly after that, he had one of the big starring turnout roles in Tropic Thunder, where he plays Les Grossman, and he played it very well. It was a great role for him, and it really, well, showed everybody that, hey, this guy still has it. I mean, yeah, he had a couple movies that were misfires, Night and Day, Rock of Ages, and The Mummy, of course, but look at what he's done since then. 4 very successful Mission Impossible movies, Jack Reacher, which has spawned its own series of films, Oblivion, Edge of Tomorrow, American Made, Top Gun Maverick. And now he's got the final Mission Impossible movie coming out soon, The Final Reckoning. And then he's got a new film with Alejandro González Iñárritu, which is coming out next year as well. So, really, overall, this did not kill Tom Cruise's career being a part owner of United Artists like it did when David Putnam owned Columbia Pictures. Like, it really wasn't that point where, you know, they essentially had to send David Putnam back to England and he had to start from scratch again, and he could never really come back from that. Tom Cruise has come back from that brief time he was at United Artists, and while it wasn't one of the worst tenures ever, you could just definitely tell that his creativity and his mindset was not in making United Artists the company that it really could have been under his and Paula Wagner's reign overall. But United Artists itself is not even dead anymore, as not but 10 years after the last movie that came out with Hot Tub Time Machine 2 in July of 2024, it was revealed that Scott Stuber was nearing a deal to revive the United Artists label under Amazon MGM Studios for the first time in over a decade. Amazon confirmed the news shortly after in a press release announcing that Stuber had entered a multi-year first-look deal with the company, and under that deal, Stuber will produce films for the newly revived banner under his own company, either for a theatrical release or streaming release through Amazon Prime Video. Stuber will also be involved in every film released under the United Artists banner, and they've already got several films already in development right now, including Christmas in Paradise, The Girl in the Lake, the Highlander remake, Kill Your Darlings, and an untitled biopic about Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter who covered Russia. So yeah, basically, United Artists is back overall, and there was and it really it's weird because the whole thing when Tom Cruise ran United Artists, it didn't live up to what they were really going for. You could see what they were trying to do overall, but the fact that it just lasted 2 movies, and they didn't even get to do the 4 films that they wanted to do every year, just those 2, like, you really gotta wonder, like, what would have happened if they had been allowed to keep going? Would they have still been able to continue continue trying out new things until they got it right, or was this just a last-ditch effort to try to save the studio overall before it was essentially too late to do it? But I mean, we'll never really know. It was certainly a weird period in time, that time Tom Cruise and Paula Wagner led United Artists, and it didn't really amount to a whole lot. So I wanted to bring that up overall. So especially with Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning coming out next week. But so that's the story of how Tom Cruise ran United Artists, and it didn't really prove to be successful, but it didn't hurt his career overall. And United Artists, after a brief bit of time to rethink their strategy overall, it's coming back is pretty soon. So with all that said, if you want to hear what I had to say last week about the future of the movies, go ahead and take a look at the last video I did. Check out the playlist below to see some other videos as well. And I will see you guys next time. So thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.